This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation, with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. Today I want to talk about the final twist to come. And so I'm going to return to what is the new series of sort of stories. Well, it's not a series, it's called, I call it an arc of stories that I've put out that run kind of parallel to Heirs of the Kingdom. And these are 3 individual books, but kind of they relate to the series and they all kind of link in a weird sort of way. Back in May I put out the Countess of Darkness, which is the second part of the arc stories. And you can imagine, when you put a book out, you never really know how well it's going to do. And so I was delighted to go onto Amazon, where I saw a review, and the view was kind of headed, "Oh my God, I want more." Love this author and his way of drawing you into his books and the whole story. Love the story and little twists which make me think twice before reading on. Really need more. What a wonderful review. I was so thrilled to read that. So I think there's been enough time passed since the release of the Countess of Darkness, which was in May of this year, to actually have a little bit of a conversation about the book. And, I want to look at some of the twists of fate that led up to me actually writing what I really do think is actually one of my best books to date. When I finally finished writing the series of Heirs of the Kingdom, which was back in 2020, I did get a lot of groans from those readers who'd been very invested in my post-apocalyptic fantasy series since page 1. And to be honest, they wanted me to continue on. But, if you look at it from my point of view, I've been writing for 14 years non-stop as I layered each part of this story together. And so with the final page, I've got to say, I took a deep breath of relief. I'm glad that this story had finally been told. Because, I invested a huge amount of time, resources and effort into writing this book over many, many years. It was 14 years in the writing, but I started putting this thing together at least 20 years before that. Kingdom is really well known for the way in which the story twists and turns, and yet the biggest twists were yet to come. Now, a good few asked, how can you stop? And I used to say, I'd kind of smile and I'd very politely respond how I wanted a break, a chance to write something else. And at that time, unbeknown to my readers, I'd already started pulling together the makings of a new set of stories, which were, not so much a continuation of Heirs of the Kingdom, but they were kind of related to it. I like to say, let's call them first cousins. You see, the truth was that the Heirs of the Kingdom series flowed very well, and its primary focus was the heroes of the tale, who were Robbie and Runestone. So, from my point of view as the author, to a degree, this was their story. But for those of you who have listened to all of the podcasts, you'll know that I think it was episode 2 of the podcast was devoted to the continuation of the story in the 3 new books. I called them the arc, because even though they were based on the characters within Heirs of the Kingdom, what I'd actually done was taken many of the missing links from the HTTK series and wove them together into 3 standalone tales, each focused on one person in particular from the Kingdom series. Now, Rise of the Raven was to a degree a predictable story, as it had parts of it actually literally copied and pasted and lifted from Rise of the Raven, which I was writing at the same time as the 8th book. And then I wove them into the 8th book in a way that, it was in that aspect that I created what was to become the first of many, many very unpredictable twists of the story. Brannard's story was not actually as predictable as the readers first thought, and it was in that context that I was able to twist things around. So, Kingdom was kind of misleading. And then Rise of the Raven became the true story of Branagh. So, you've got to ask the question, how was I able to do that? Well, to be quite honest, what I did was, instead of writing what others had said in the Heirs of the Kingdom series, such as like Gwendolyn's version of events or Enna's version of events, I wrote the whole story from the point of view of Branagh, the so-called person of evil who began the line of darkness in the first place. Branagh was the start of all things dark. Rise of the Raven asked just one question, which in itself was actually a twist of the story, which was, well, just how evil was Branagh? If you read the book and you actually chart her life, I'm sure that you'll very quickly start to realise that the politics of the ancient times were far more devious than maybe you would have been led to believe through Kingdom. The truth was that yes, Branagh did things others would deem terrible, but most of what she actually did was in defence of her people, and also for the love of Ariel. Branagh was fighting oppression, and it truly was a fight to the death. She had information that Rhiannon needed on the Merle, and she needed it for more power and control. And Branagh understood that and so withheld it. And so the fury of Rhiannon was unleashed against her. The whole idea of Branagh being this dark and sinister figure suddenly flipped completely over, and her story was actually one of pain, tragedy, and pure love. And it was not quite the story that was expected. In Heirs of the Kingdom, we have one narrative, but it conflicts with the true story of Branagh, which is actually the biggest reason of why I wanted to write it. Now, the same goes for the Countess of Darkness, which is the story of the most feared and hated dark figure of the whole of the Heirs to the Kingdom story. Morgana of Cornwall, or as she, becomes later better known, Morgan Le Fay, is, this very dark, oppressive, and very, very sinister figure. The Countess of Darkness, I knew from page 1, would completely flip the script and turn every reader's perception utterly on its head. I deliberately designed the story that way. Throughout all of Heirs to the Kingdom, I got well known for throwing in red herrings and flipping things over, and to be honest, it's been a wonderful experience to write, to write this and actually see the real surprise of some of my readers as they read it when it was first published in May of this year. It is, one of the biggest surprise twists of the whole story that I've done to date. And, I've been planning this since way back when I began to write the 5th book in the Kingdom series. You see, there's one fact that I had Robbie say a few times through the book. He actually said it in book 1 over Billy and Deb's child. And I do think it's a really, really important piece of information. And, I wonder how many Heirs of the Kingdom readers will actually remember it. She kissed his cheek. I understand, Robbie. I know how close you two are. She says she will have it and raise it as a Loxley. Will you be able to handle that? Robbie was surprised and turned to her in the dark. How do you mean? That child will be a daily reminder of him, Rob. I would never blame a child for the sins of its parents. I will only see the child of Alice as nothing more than Alice's. Rune snuggled up and was quiet. He could see her bright eyes twinkling in the dark, and he knew something else was on her mind. He put his arm around her, and she snuggled closer and put her head on his chest. He looked at her. What? Will you really kill him, Robbie, after everything? Robbie let out a long, deep sigh. First clear arrow I have is Billy's. I promised her, Rune. I don't have a choice. Robbie understood something in book 1 that no other reader considered, which was, no child is born evil. And, as he states, no child should be blamed for the sins of the parents. Morgana is a child of the line of Branna. But that does not necessarily mean that she is evil. It's possibly one of the most important lines in the Heirs to the Kingdom series, because Robbie's perception of innocence within children goes right to the heart of the Countess of Darkness. Because Morgana was loved by her parents, she was adored and spoilt by her father, and she was pure and innocent as a child. So, when you sit back and you really deeply consider that, which I have, you have the most unique starting point for the beginning of a journey that leads to a place of tragedy and heartbreak that could twist and strain the mind of even the strongest of all of us. And that, in a nutshell, was my whole basis for wanting to write Morgana's story. I started at the beginning, and I walked her through the process of growing up into maturity and seeing the real ugly truth of the world that she had actually been born into, and I charted the impact that it had on her. There's a 10-year gap between Rise of the Raven and the Countess of Darkness, and both stories feature Branna heavily. And yet, the Countess of Darkness is completely Morgana's story, which is why I did not list these books as another series and made them a story arc that runs parallel to before and after Heirs to the Kingdom. Because there are actually 3 stories in this arc, the last of which is the story of Iona, Queen Violet Stone of Fae. To be honest, Violet Stone is without doubt the ultimate Heirs to the Kingdom story. But I'm not going to talk about that today, because I've got plenty to come on that particular story next year. I'll admit now, these 3 stories in the new arc all have one thing in common. And the theme that will tie all of these books together is actually the theme of perception. And it's really important that readers understand that. While reading Heirs to the Kingdom, I steered everybody into the perception that Morgana was vile and evil, which in the story she actually is. But then I asked the question, how does a young girl who loses her father that she dotes on cope, living alone in a castle where the man she saw rape her mother is now her stepfather? Now, I think it is clear few Heirs to the Kingdom readers considered this point, and that was actually my greatest hope whilst writing this series. Throughout the whole series of 8 books, no one ever says a nice word about Morgana. They all hate her and fear her, and to a degree they have good reason to. But when you slide back through time and you look backwards to her as a young, lonely woman, everything starts to change. So that is actually where I began her story. Morgana is just 15 summers old when she meets Branna for the first time, and at first she actually feels afraid. Behind her she heard footsteps, and then the door opened. She turned and saw a young woman with long black hair and eyes as dark as roax. She stared at Branna. "Who are you? I was not told of any visitor. This is my private room. No one else is allowed in here." Branna smiled. "Fear not, child. I'm of your line. Well, to be honest, you're actually of my line. I thought it was time we spoke, and so here I am. They call me Raven. It's very nice to meet you, Morgana." She stared for a moment, looking afraid. Branna gave another smile. "You have nothing to fear from me. I sense the feelings of those around me, and your fear is unnecessary. I have no intent to harm you. I suppose you are my great-granddaughter? Your family." Morgana appeared to understand. Lothar has talked of you. He favours you highly. Although he says you rule the family with an iron grip. Branna walked over to the large bed and sat down. She patted it with her hand. This is but an introductory visit. I've asked your mother several times to allow you to visit us at home, but she has, as yet, declined. I fear her new life has severed the ties of your father from her, and so I decided that I would visit here this day and meet you. I would have been here sooner, but life has a habit of preventing things. Morgana closed the door and walked over to the bed and sat down. Morgana was slender, dressed in a long black dress. Her complexion was pale, and she had very long, black, sleek, straight hair. Branna could see how like her as a young girl she was. There was a very strong resemblance to her own mother in her. Morgana looked at her with a curious look. I was told you were stern and would snap at the family who did not please you. Branna gave a giggle. Well, I'm the head of the family, and I need to be obeyed at times, so yes, I know when to shout if needs be. Morgana smirked. I've wanted to meet you. I was not sure I ever would. It's not easy to get away from here. My parents do not allow me that far from home. I was not here simply because I had to escort and entertain Eleanor. She's visiting at the moment. To be honest, I just wish she'd go back to Avalon. Branna gave a chuckle. I take it you do not like her very much. I've heard everyone thinks she's wonderful. Morgana gave a sigh. I'm not like them. I'm different. My title is Countess of Cornwall. She's an heir to the throne of Avalon, and one day will be a queen, so she does see me as lesser than her. I hate how everyone fawns over her. I just wish she'd disappear and not come back here. I hate her visits. Branna raised her eyebrows. Is she really that unbearable? Well, if that's the case, I shall have to see what we can do about that. I cannot have a granddaughter of mine looked down upon. You come from a line of proud Saxons. They do not bend easily to others, and have the utmost respect shown to them, as I'm sure you so often with your father. Morgana put her head down for a second. He died when I was just 4 summers. Branna reached for her hand and took it in hers, and she gave it a squeeze. I know. It was a bitter blow to me. I spent a great deal of time talking with him before he came here. I have to confess I favoured him highly over his brother Ivor. I liked that he was highly intelligent. We spent many a long hour in my library at home discussing his plans for life. He was very proud the night you were born. I took you out of your mother and handed you straight over to him. He had the biggest smile. He was so happy. Morgana turned and looked at her. You brought me into the world. Branna gave a nod. I've birthed all of my grandchildren. Did you not know? Morgana shook her head. No, I thought I was born here. When Branna first encounters Morgana, she's quiet, withdrawn, very much a loner, and suffers greatly from the pain she feels at the loss of her father. It's a burden that she has carried since she was 4 years old, and there's no evil in her. If anything, she is a broken-hearted, lonely teenager who feels trapped in a life she hates, being forced to be nice to the man who murdered her father and raped her mother. I mean, she has no one, and she also has fake gifts. But there's no person who understands her enough to just simply talk to her about all of the feelings of power that are growing inside her. And, those feelings actually frighten her. There are 2 parts of the kingdom's story that ask very, very important questions. And one of them is, if Morgana was so evil, Why did Merlin teach her the white lines? And also, at the end of the Circle of Darkness, as Branna sits wounded, she asks Morgana to help her. And it's very clear that Branna trusts Morgana far more than any other member of her family. So there is a close bond there, which is obvious. And earlier in the books, Branna actually defends Morgana, even though Morgana actually killed Branna's daughter, as Runestone discovers at the end of Book 7 from Fagin. One can only ask, why would Branna trust her? As we now see in the Countess of Darkness, that first initial meeting between the two forms a bond of connection that grows deeper and deeper. Branna becomes Morgana's support and actually her saviour. And surprisingly, it's Branna who suggests that Morgana approaches Merlin and asks him to teach her. That actually is the first of many surprises, and very quickly as you read into the book deeper, you start to understand that Heirs to the Kingdom, like Rise of the Raven, has a narrative amongst the characters that has been clouded over time by bias. Rise of the Raven shows how much power Rhiannon holds, as she does rule with authority and an ironclad hold on power, some of which is revealed in the Circle of Darkness. But as we follow Morgana on her journey of self-discovery, you start to see the full truth of the politics and the treachery that plays out in Avalon at the start of the opening of the realm. It is, another twist that challenges the narrative of Heirs to the Kingdom, and it really opens the reader's eyes, and it does challenge their belief system. This is one of the most important reasons as to why the reader must read through Heirs to the Kingdom and then read Rise of the Raven and the Countess of Darkness, because the arc stories in themselves are actually the real twist that reveal the full truth. The Countess of Darkness is a story that, I've got to say, I've wanted to tell this for such a long time. In all of my years of writing, I've made so many notes behind the scenes as I framed each moment carefully through Heirs to the Kingdom in the very same way that I framed out Branna's story. Most readers, when they began Rise of the Raven, they were under the impression that Branna was this kind of cruel, twisted, dark and vile person. But as they saw, it was not really the case. Her life was actually very tragic and filled with heartbreak and pain. So, in my own mind, the Countess of Darkness is more about the destruction and corruption of innocence. It's something that I can actually equate to the modern world of today, and how we become so fixated on stealing the young of their innocence at a younger and younger age. It appears to me that today we are in far too great a rush to rob a child of the magic of fantasy and pure innocence, as we now sexualize children and we hurt and abuse them at younger and younger ages. In many ways, I've kind of always understood Morgana. Her motives were crystal clear to me, and I always knew that there was some sort of deep-seated reason for her hatred of the ruling council. And yet at times, she often admired them in her own insanity, that was driven by the rage of her injustice that she had suffered as a young woman. The truth was, she actually admired, envied, and really did respect Runestone. And in sort of moments of clarity, she saw a little of her younger self within Runestone, which I showed in the Bridge of Sequana when Runestone escapes and Ursula is caught in the glass box high up in the Raven Tower. The Dark One prowled around the box, checking to see if there's any signs of weakness that Rune had used to escape. Her red, malicious eyes looked through the glass at her young, dark assistant. You doubt her abilities. Let me tell you, Raven, she has grown in immense power. over the years. You see her as your lesser, but beware. She has a very lethal bite when she uses it. The pale face of Raven smirked as her dark eyes glinted through the glass. Still, she was not up to it, was she? Had I stayed, maybe things would have been different. The Dark One walked around to her table to consult her books. You feel you are more worthy of the Flower Girl? Oh, be careful, my little Raven. A fall of arrogance stings deeply. She turned from the glass box, her long dark hair whipping into the air with a snap. Well, you should know. I mean, how many times have you lost her now? The Dark One stiffened as she lifted a coloured powder in a small vial. Your ignorance of the Flower Girl is your weakness, Raven. Do not underestimate her talents, for we have sparred together many times, and you may find your lack of respect may be your undoing. Raven spun around to face her grandmother. Her voice was calm, although it contained some of an air of offence. You lecture me on understanding her, and yet your box is completely empty. The eyes of the Dark One flickered a deep, dark red. Do not make snap judgments because you lack the gifts. You have no idea of her true powers, and should tread carefully when finding fault in the work of others. Raven stared defiantly at her grandmother. Her voice rose a little, and her tone changed to more of an accusing one. I'm not the one who lost her. I would have made sure there was greater protections. This will change everything at a point when we're about to strike the final blow. Have you any idea of the damage you've done by leaving her here in the hands of an amateur? The Dark One lifted a thin white hand with a long black fingernail and pointed it at Raven Merle. Her eyes glowed with a dark, sinister light, and Raven lifted her hands to her throat as her airways restricted. She gave a gasp for breath and gritted her teeth as her defiant eyes stared back at her grandmother. But she refused to yield as the Dark One lifted her hand and Raven floated up off the floor, her eyes widening and her face starting to redden. The Dark One sneered at her, her voice cold and obviously angered. You forget your place, little Raven. Don't you ever judge me, for I have spent years in my craft and could easily swat you like an annoying fly. Your powers are strong, and it is true you've learned much from your short years, but never think you will gain the better of those who studied longer and deeper. You have a long way to go before you'll be a match for me or the Flower Girl. Do you understand? Her respect is clearly seen in her view of Runestone, but it's also there in the Countess of Darkness as she confronts Merlin, and he sees for the first time how Morgana, no matter what her own feelings towards the Council are, she understands that they're actually a symbol to many, and in that case, he starts to understand that Morgana will, in a strange way, actually protect them. Morgana, why does it matter? Why are you, of all people, so angry about this? You've expressed your objection and resistance to the council since the death of your father. Morgana stood up and placed her notes on the table. Yeah, I will not deny. Had all of you not conspired, my father would be alive, and my life maybe could have been better. I despise the council for their part in his death, but I've always understood the symbols that they are to their people. I do not care what any of you think. Allowing this new god into the head of the king and forcing the people to believe something that their lives can never touch is wrong, Merlin. Why can you not see that? All of us in this land have ancients who walked before us. It is who we are. And when the tribes of the Romani came, we resisted them. And yes, Uther and Arthur have both played their parts in pushing them out. I may not like the council as people, but the people of this land believe in all of you, and they look to you for guidance. And for what? To be told, you are no longer relevant? Generations of belief are to be simply snuffed out because precious Arthur has a cross around his neck? We are of the earth, not Romani. That is our identity, and yet Arthur and this new god call us heathen, pagan, peasant. How can you let that happen? He gave a slight laugh and looked at her. I find myself quite surprised, Morgana. Such passion for your conviction. I do believe you've matured well. Morgana, ask any of us. We'll all tell you. This Christ is spreading like a fire on dry plains. We cannot hold back change. If we try, we will lose everything. The realm of men is destined to follow their own will. Yes, we will at times be called upon, but many will follow this new God and leave the beliefs of the past behind. It was always destined to happen. The lines of Fae will continue, as will our line of white and the green, but ultimately it is up to them. Morgana shook her head. No! It's not. Arthur's already told many of my line. They can no longer meet in their sacred places. Arthur intends to kill all of it, and I'm sorry, but I will not allow that. My family have a right, as my mother did, to follow their belief, and no king has the right to stop them. My mother is a highly regarded and respected queen of her people, and yet she was treated as lesser by Uther, who saw her as a mere prize to warm a king's bed. And now his son is doing it again, by wiping away the memory of her people. Merlin, I will defend them to the death if I have to. Isn't that what you have taught me? To stand beside the people, under our protection? In many ways he admired her. This was the first time he'd ever seen her speak with such passion in defense of her people. She'd always been so isolated and alone, and yet as he watched her bright dark eyes shine with her conviction, he actually felt very proud of her. He nodded his head. All right, Morgana, you feel connected to these people. Argue their case to the king and protect them, for that is what a follower of the White Lines should do. I really think this is a pretty remarkable scene, and I loved actually putting this all together because even in her opposition, Morgana proves that she's far more in tune with her surroundings than most others. If anything, her wisdom is as sharp as Merlin's, and he is actually greatly impressed by her. So, one then has to ask the question, because, Morgana is true to her oath of the White Lines at this point. Where does it all go wrong? Morgana is faced with two paths, both of which are known to the White Lord Alberlin, and he appears to her in her deepest moment of grief, and he asks her what direction that she will take. One part of the twist of Heirs to the Kingdom actually comes in the book The Circle of Darkness, which was book 8, when Gwendolen, who stands at the side of the White Lord, realizes that the White Lord is far more aware of things than others would actually realize. And it's within the Countess of Darkness that you truly start to understand what Gwendolen realized in that moment stood with the White Lord during the Circle of Darkness. Morgana is knelt by her mother's grave, grieving the death and the loss of her parent that she cherished the most. And then she is confronted with the Lord as she faces him in the book. Behind her, the faint outline of a tatty hooded robed figure watched on. And as Morgana quietened down, he moved forward slightly. Morgana sensed him, and she sat up. Have you also come for me? To punish me for the sins of my accusers? No, I'm merely a spectator in all things. Although, you stand on a fine edge, young Morgana, and it interests me in what you will do next. Morgana gave a sniffle and stood up and wiped her eyes. She turned to face the shadowy outline of Alberlin. I am Whiteline. So you are indeed my master, as you are Merlin's. Do you wish also to command me? His hood moved slightly as she looked at him. It may surprise you to know that to this day you have honoured your oath that you undertook as a student of my guardian. I see only one life that weighs heavy on you, and in that I feel you judge yourself harshly, for it appears your life was in great peril, and your need was to defend yourself. My belief is to preserve life. I'm not so casual in the way I deal out death, unlike others you are allied to. Indeed, I admire the sense you hold for the injustice you see. My interest now lies in the path you should walk, as I see many roads, of which some are shrouded in darkness. She gave a slight laugh. You care about me, whilst your council destroy whoever they choose to get what they want? What about those who have suffered at their hands? Tell me, Lord, what are the deaths and wrecked lives that grieve for the actions of your so-called superiors who wield the power? That is exactly my point, young student. I have given free will to all, even you, and I will not step in to stop you. You have the power of your own choice, and it is in that the way forward is paved. I see the choices you have and the lengths you've gone to. I'm not as blind as you think, but I will add that you alone took it upon yourself to act and speak out against the injustice you see. That was the path you started. All I ask is, will you continue straight or deviate onto darker roads? All I can do is fight for what I have seen as unjust, and yet I fight the corruption of those you support. And you stand here and question me? She gave a slight laugh and turned and pointed behind her. There lies my mother, laid out in a box next to the man who raped her. Tell me, wise lord, can you not see how insulting that is to her memory? She was a queen of those dedicated to the faith of the earth, a faith that celebrated you and those who came with you. She was a woman of the highest standing in this realm, and yet you have sat idle and allowed Arthur and this rapist to bring forth a god who betrays her and all of us. You seat a queen in the first realm and call her glorious, while she hurts the very people who have toiled in this land to create her realm of power. How can you stand before me and request what path I take, when you've never cared of the path of those you have aligned yourself with? The hood twitched. Yours, young student, interests me most. She gave a sigh. Oh, your priorities appear to be somewhat off balance, for I am meaningless, as all I want to do is live in peace. And yet, no matter how hard I have tried, since the day I was born I've been attacked for a reason I still do not know. My lord, do not waste your time on me. I have nothing left. My father and mother have gone, and I feel empty like a barren wilderness. The White Lord turned and walked slowly towards the door. The time to choose your path will come soon, and the choice you make will be of great importance. You have never been meaningless, young student. The path you take will be a great bearing on everything. Think with care of your road from this day, for if I am right, you will bring about great change. He faded away, and she stood alone, lost, filled with grief, and shook her head. You know it all, and still do nothing. Does everything have to burn down before you'll finally take note? You know, that is like another really, really big twist of this story arc. And the biggest is actually yet to come, which will be in the last book of this arc, which will be Violet Stone. But, you know, this is a really important moment because it confirms that Gwendolyn had worked out that Albelin had never really been as absent as he'd made out. If anything, he had stood back and he'd actually allowed the ruling council, you know, which included Rhiannon, and also Branna and Morgana, to walk their own path of complete independence. It really is a huge twist when you discover or consider that all through Heirs to the Kingdom, everybody simply assumed that if things got too bad, Albelin would step in. But he hadn't. The White Lord understood everything, and in doing so he allowed things to play out fully, something that would take over 1,000 years to finally correct itself. And that will be more than apparent in the book Violet Stone. I really don't want to go into too much more detail with this book because, you know, I am very, very aware that there are other readers out there who really do want to read the Countess of Darkness and they've not yet done so. But from my own personal point of view, I do feel that her story is one of betrayal, which began at a very early age. But there is also a wonderful, innocent beauty to this story as well. Her fate is not a pleasant one, and the saddest aspect of all of her story is only Branna really truly knows the truth, and in knowing it, it absolutely breaks her heart, because for Branna, Morgana is more like a daughter to her, which does explain the very end chapters of Heirs to the Kingdom and the Circle of Darkness, and why, when all around her was crumbling and falling apart, she turned to Morgana alone for help. The Countess of Darkness was a very, very long time in the writing. I mean, it really did begin when I was working on the 5th book of Heirs to the Kingdom. My own personal feeling is that this is a book that I am immensely proud of, and I do feel it is one of my best. I've come a long way since I first began to write The Bowman of Locksley, and you know, I think I'm quite sure that if I was to write The Bowman of Locksley today, it probably would be a much better book. But that is all part and parcel of writing. You know, you've got to learn to do it, and you do improve the more you do. And it's something that I often tell to new writers that I meet. The evolution of a story is an incredibly wonderful thing, and my story has come a very, very long way, which is shown in the way that the Countess of Darkness twists and weaves through the whole of the story, answering questions that remain from Heirs to the Kingdom, but also asking new ones that will drive the story to its final climax. And it's a climax that I don't think anybody will see coming. Morgana's story is a very, very powerful one, and you know, it is resounding deeply within many of the readership. And so I hope, if you have read Heirs to the Kingdom, you really will feel the desire to read the first 2 books of this arc story, and start, you know, by reading with Branna, by reading Rise of the Raven, and then progress on through to Morgana's story in the Countess of Darkness. And then finally, you'll move on to the last book of this story arc, which is going to focus on the young queen-to-be, Iona Violet of Locksley, in the book Violet Stone. And that hopefully will be released next year. It's written, and it's not quite ready, but it's not far short. That'll be published sometime in 2024. As much as Morgana's story twists, there really is an even bigger one to come, especially in the reasoning behind the prediction of Opal. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish today actually with that prediction. Because there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of the things that Opal says and does throughout all of the Heirs to the Kingdom series. And she really is, although she does appear to be like a part character within the series, Opal is actually one of the main players. And so I'm going to leave you today, and thank you, with her words. Look to the coming of the bowman, for he will herald the start of new days. My thanks to everybody who's tuned in today and listened to this podcast. You know, I mean, I sit here recording this hoping that listeners will come and tune in. And so I'm always delighted when I see that people have. And as I keep telling everybody, it's still a relatively new podcast. You know, I think we're about 23, 24 episodes in. Still got a long, long ways to go. And, you know, at the same time as recording this, I'm also writing other stuff. I am working on a brand new fantasy adventure, which is a whole different kind of world, different kinds of races, different kinds of people, and I am kind of preoccupied with that at the moment. And so it is at times difficult remembering stuff from Heirs to the Kingdom and literally the Countess of Darkness, which I've just published. I've got a new curio story due out, which I'm also working on at the moment as I'm doing the final edit. So the fourth book of the Curio Chronicles will be released, hopefully towards the end of October and early November this year, so I can have it on the websites and on the shelves and in stock everywhere by Christmas. So again, if you've listened all the way through this podcast, I am very, very grateful, and I thank you deeply. I'll be back next week with something else to kind of interest you, confuse you, or twist your minds, whichever way I go with whatever story I choose. Until such time, keep turning those pages, keep reading the books, and keep expanding your minds. And I will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.